on the 14th of May 2025. I can see that we have present Councillors Brogan, Archie Buchanan, Matthew Buchanan, Kalikis, Convery. I have apologies from Councillor Cooper. Also present today are Councillors Cowan, Cowie, Devlin and Dewar. I have apologies from Councillor Fagan. Also present today are Councillors Falconer, Ferguson and Fulton. Councillor Gowland? I'm not seeing you present. Also, I have apologies, from Councillor Gray. Councillor Lennon? I'm not seeing you present. Also present today are Councillors Lockhart, Mars, McAllen, McCreary, McLachlan, Ray, Robb, Shearer. Councillor Williams? I'm not seeing you present. We have a number of officers in attendance, and with that, I'll pass back to yourself, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth Ann. Any declarations of interest? Don't see any. Item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting. I'll move that as a correct record. Agreed?
I'll second that.
Agreed, thank you. Any questions or comments? The minutes of the special meeting, pages 15 to 24, I'll move that as well.
I'll second that.
Any questions or comments? Don't see any. Thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda is the Housing and Technical Resources Revenue Budget Monitoring 24-25 HRA, and it's Kathleen Gowrie, please. Kathleen.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide information on the actual expenditure against budget for the period the 1st of April 24 to 21st of February 25, and also to provide a forecast for the year to the 31st of March 25. This is the 4th Revenue Monitoring Report to Committee for financial year 24-25. At section 5.1, it notes that at the 21st of February, the resource projected outturn for the financial year is a break-even. This position includes a transfer from reserves. Appendix A on page 27 provides further expenditure details along with detailed variance explanations and proposed variants. I refer members back to section 2 of the report. The committee is asked to note the forecast to the 31st of March 25 of a break-even and to approve the proposed variants.
Thank you very much. I'll move the recommendation.
And I'll second it.
Any questions or comments? I don't see anyone. Thank you very much. Item 5 on the agenda, Housing and Technical Resources Revenue Budget Monitoring 24-25, excluding the Housing Revenue Account, pages 29 to 34. And again, it's Kathleen.
Thanks, Chair. Again, this report is covering expenditure for the period the 1st of April 24 to 21st of February 25. It's also providing a forecast for the year to the 31st of March 25. At section 5.1 on page 29, it notes that at the 21st of February, the resource projected outturn for the financial year is an underspend of £705,000, and that's before transfers to reserves. This is outlined in the service analysis statement on Appendix A on page 31, which details key highlights by service for the resource. Following the Council's formal probable outturn exercise, the forecast to the 31st of March is a break-even position after transfers to reserves of £705,000, which were approved by Executive Committee on the 12th of February 25. Detailed variance explanations and proposed variants for each of the services are shown on Appendices C to D on pages 33 to 35. I refer members back to section 2 of the report. The committee is asked to note the forecast to 31st of March for break-even position after transfers to reserves and to approve the proposed budget variants.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'll move the recommendations.
I'll second it.
And I see you've got Kirsten Robb. Kirsten.
Thank you, and thanks for allowing me onto the Housing Committee. Really interesting. I've got a few questions. Can I ask about where in the budget the impact of the January storms were felt? I've got another couple ones in this section as well. Do you want them all in one go? Or?
No, if you like, carry on. I'm sure the officers will pick them up.
Okay, so it was, where in the budget the impact of the storms is felt? On the Net Zero Innovation Fund on page 34. Can I confirm that that is now resting with Property Services? And when we'll hear about what the previous year's spend was and what this year's spend will be on. And kind of similarly, but not mentioned, is the regular renewable heat incentive payments that are secured last year's in the June executive. Will that also be coming to housing, and what is the plan to spend on that?
Okay, thanks, Kirsten. Kathleen, care to address it?
Yep, certainly in terms of the storm damage, then the expenditure for that, you would see that on page 34. So that will be sitting within property services, and it'll be within the property costs. So you'll see some of the expenditure there in relation to any costs that are sitting across, probably more like planned maintenance, so across the kind of properties for the council. Okay. In terms of the innovation fund, I don't know, Craig, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer about the innovation fund?
Okay, thanks for the question, Councillor Rob. In terms of the Net Zero Innovation Fund, the effect of that, as it's saying in the note, is 75,000. So we are looking at a whole range of projects that are part of that. There's been a paper been to CMT in terms of what those projects are. I can give you a breakdown of that if that's helpful. But I think that's actually reported back to the Climate Change Committee as well. But if you need any more detail, I can certainly get that to you.
Okay, Kirsten?
And then there was the outstanding regular annual payments for the renewable heat incentive money that is available for these sort of projects as well. I secured that at last year's executive, so that's at least £100,000 a year. So just to see where that's sitting and what the plan is.
Yeah, we can get that as well. It's all kind of part of that update report, so I'll get that to you.
Okay. Graham, would you like to come in? Yep.
Sorry, it was just to clarify in specific to the RHI bit from last year's June in terms of that was put to enhance our SEEF programme in terms of that for going forward as well. So yeah, that's sitting in reserves to be used as part of the SEEF budget for next year as well. So yeah, that's in terms of for last year's spending then into next year to enhance the programme. And as I say, we'll be working on that, the overall SEEF programme, which that funding makes up part of that.
Thanks very much. Okay. Okay. Item 6 on the agenda, Housing and Technical Resources Capital Budget Monitoring 24-25. Again, Kathleen Gowrie, please.
Thanks, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide information on the progress of the capital programme for housing and technical resources for the period the 1st of April to 21st of February 25. Again, this is the fourth capital monitoring report to committee for the financial year 24-25. At section 5.1 on your report, it notes that the Housing Capital Programme totals £77.248 million and detailed along with the funding sources is on Appendix A on this report on page 38. The current estimate suggests an outturn of £71.204 million, resulting in a projected underspend of just over £6 million. This is as a result of delays in site starts at Cairnswell Avenue, Cambuslang and Brackenhill Fareham Hamilton. In addition, the average purchase price of properties purchased through the open market purchase scheme has reduced, reflecting the current size of properties. The outturn underspend of £6 million has increased by just nearly £2 million since the last reported position back in January. That has been negatively impacted by the supply in the housing market in January 25. At the 21st of February, there was a number of these acquisitions that were anticipated to settle very early in April 25. I refer members back to section 2 of the report. The committee is asked to note the capital programme of £77.248 million and a forecast expenditure of £71.24 be noted. Thank you, Chair.
I'll move the recommendation. Agree to note. Well agreed.
I'll second it.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Don't see anyone. Thank you very much. Item 7 on the agenda. Sorry. David.
Might be a bit early to ask this question, Chair, but that £6 million underspend, will that be used to speed up other sites that we could use on to bring them forward, or what is the plans with that £6 million quid?
Kathleen?
Yeah. As part of the budget that was approved for 25-26, we had already recognised that there was slippage on those sites that I'd referred to, and the funding is required in the following financial year. So the budget that was set for 25-26 incorporates some of that slippage being carried forward. So it's fully built into the programme for the following year.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Welcome. Item 7 on the agenda, Housing and Technical Resources Capital Budget Monitoring 24-25, excluding the HRA, and it's Graham Booth. Graham, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Again, this is our standard capital budget monitoring report for the general services and the fourth for financial year 24-25. And this reflects the budget, spend and outturn position to the 21st of February, which is our accounting period 12. Section 3 gives the background to the report and explains the revised budget is based on the programme approved back in June last year, and this has been adjusted for approved changes during the financial year. And there's been no change to this budget since the last report to committee. At section 5.1, we're noting that the resources total capital programme for the year is 9.984 million. Section 2 notes a forecast spend for the year at period 12 of 8.120 million, and this is the same forecast as the last report to the committee. The forecast underspend reflects the timing of spend across this year and into next financial year, and it will result in budget required in 25-26 rather than 24-25. And funding for projects remaining underspent at the financial year end will be carried forward to allow those projects to be completed in 2025-26. Officers have continued to maximise spend in 2024-25 where possible. The year-end position is currently being finalised, and this will be reported to the Executive Committee at the end of June and the next meeting of this committee in August. And for information, actual spend incurred to the 21st of February was 6.344 million. As we work through the year-end position, that spend has now increased in line with our outturn that we're forecasting, so no issues to highlight there. I would then refer committee back to recommendation in section 2 of the report that the budget of 9.984 million and forecast spend of 8.120 million on the general capital programme be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. And I'll move the recommendation. We all agreed to note?
I'll second it.
Thank you. No questions or comments? Sure, David? I'm just teasing. You said you were a bit early, maybe coming in with this, but you were actually almost too late, but anyway. Item 8 on the agenda, Housing and Technical Resources Workforce Monitoring January and February 25, and that's pages 43 to 50. Eileen McPeak. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the standard workforce monitoring report for Housing and Technical Resources covering the period January to February 2025. So section 4.1 outlines the attendance statistics for committee, and the details are in Appendix 1. So the resource absence rate for February was 7.0%. That had increased by 0.3% compared to the previous month and is the same as the council-wide figure. Compared to the previous year, February 2024, the absence figure has increased by 1.4%. And as at February, then, the projected annual average absence rate for the resource for 24-25 is 6.6%, compared to a council-wide average of 5.9%. Members will be aware that managers continue to follow the maximising attendance policy and work with personnel colleagues to ensure that appropriate supports are in place for employees to enable them to return to work and are supported throughout their absences. Sections 4.2 to 4.5, the details are in Appendix 2, and the summary is that for the period there was 161 occupational health referrals. That's an increase of 33 compared to the same period last year. There were 6 accidents or incidents recorded during the period for the resource. And in terms of disciplinary hearings, there was 2 disciplinary hearings, there was no grievances, and there was 1 dignity at work complaint raised during the period. And in terms of analysis of leavers, their details are in Appendix 2A, and there was 5 leavers that were eligible for an exit interview, and of them, 3 of them completed an exit interview. And details of Staffing Watch, there was a decrease of 4 employees in post from the 14th of September 2024 to the 14th of December 2024. And I'll refer committee back to section 2 and ask that the workforce monitoring information for housing and technical resources covering the period January to February 2025 be noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. I'll move the recommendation. Is there any questions or comments?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Andrea.
Hi. Morning everyone, thanks. Just a very quick question that popped into my head just as you were going through the report. We've always, as a council, had trouble getting people to partake in the exit interviews. And I just wondered if it's purely an interview that's offered, or if there's maybe a sort of questionnaire, like an exit questionnaire, maybe people would be more willing to complete that rather than a face-to-face. Thanks.
A similar question was asked yesterday at Community and Enterprise, and it was commented on that it's quite difficult at times, I think. I'm sure that's what the report was. Eileen, would you like to address the question?
Yeah, it is often quite difficult to remain engaged with employees that are effectively disengaging with the organisation, but there was quite a bit of piece of work that was done a couple of years ago to try and increase the take-up of exit interviews. And you're right, there are different methods. It's not just a face-to-face interview.
Right.
Actually, when employees submit their resignation, they're sent a link so they can do an online survey. Okay. There's also a prompt that's issued following that as well. So there's a few opportunities to remind people to try and complete the survey that is classed as an exit interview, but they also have the opportunity to have a face-to-face exit interview with the manager as well, where perhaps more information would be gathered rather than just the online option.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for clarifying. I just thought when you said exit interview, you meant, you know, a face-to-face interview, and obviously that could be quite intimidating for people. So that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Eileen. No more questions. Item 9, this is items for decision. Item 9, Housing and Technical Resource Plan 25-26, pages 51 to 80. And it's Lynn Hayes. Lynn?
The purpose of the report is detailed at section 1.1 and confirms that we are seeking approval for the Housing and Technical Resources Resource Plan for 25-26. The background is detailed at section 3 and confirms that the draft resource plan has been developed to reflect corporate requirements and details the role which the plan plays in the Council's wider performance framework. Paragraph 3.7 highlights that, subject to approval today, the report will be presented to Executive Committee on the 25th of June for noting. In terms of section 4, the report notes that the resource plan for 25-26 is attached as Appendix 1. Turning to that appendix, section 2 summarises some of the content that is providing our key areas of focus for the year, and that includes improving the supply and availability of housing, addressing and continuing severe pressure on our homelessness services, effectively managing income while supporting our tenants facing financial difficulties or challenges, and maintaining our repairs and maintenance service to the highest standard. Again, within the appendix, section 4 sets out our performance measures and actions to assist in addressing the points that we are going to take forward. Back to the report, and at paragraph 4.2, the report highlights that the resource has established a number of outcomes to support the delivery of the Connect priorities in 25-26. And at paragraph 4.3, the report confirms the arrangements which are in place for the reporting of the resource plan at Q2 and Q4 to the committee. If I can refer members back to recommendations, the committee is asked to approve the following: that the resource plan for 25-26 as attached to Appendix 1 be approved, that the resource plan for 25-26 be uploaded to the Council's website following consideration by this committee, following committee approval that all resource plans will be presented to the Executive Committee on the 25th of June for noting, and that the progress reports will be provided at Q2 and Q4 to future meetings of this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. I'll move those recommendations.
I'll second them.
And do we have any questions? I've got Kirsten, Rob. Kirsten?
Thanks again. Just to commend the staff who dealt with all the fallout from the storm. We can see now there's an impact on the budget, and increasingly climate change will produce more impact on the budget. So it's really just to see in the resource plan how is that learning being picked up about ensuring our buildings are resilient and adapt to climate change into the future. So that's the first question, what learning and action has taken place. And the second one, how has that been picked up in the resource plan through a risk management control plan, and can members have a look at that, please?
Craig, yourself? Yeah.
Oh, there we go, thank you. So in terms of learning and actions, there already was a significant protocol procedure put in place from the last storm, but we've revisited all that again. We have looked at our emergency cover, how we deal with that, the type of backup contractors that we may require. So, for example, on the roofing works, which was substantial, we had our own internal teams working flat out, but we couldn't deal with everything on our own. So we'd set up 3 framework agreements, and we got 3 contractors in to assist with that, and it all worked really, really well. The final roof replacements are actually just happening again this week, so it's worked very effectively in terms of trying to get the projects delivered as quick as we possibly could. Similarly, against other types of work, again, we've got our internal resource, resourced up to deal with anything like that, as well as where we need it, backup contractors, so that they are available. It's all contractually sorted out prior to any to ask of them, so that we're not being delayed with any procurement route. So, in terms of actions, again, we will review that. We've been talking to Audit about a number of things in relation to how projects are procured, what the timelines are, how we deal with insurance claims. So it's working effectively as it can for now. But from a property services point of view, that's the main issues.
Kirsten?
Thank you, and all excellent work. That covers the kind of reactive thing, but how does the resource plan take on the proactive activity to adapt to increasing storms, ensuring that all the risks are identified in a risk control plan, and seeking future resources to ensure our buildings are more resilient to these increasing storms in the future?
Again, it's not necessarily just for the housing portfolio, but for the general services side as well. That will link directly into the estate strategy and the work we're doing with that. Any investment plans will not just be about improving the fabric conditions, but ensuring it's fit for purpose for net zero, high efficiency, structural methods will be getting looked at. So a whole range of things will link to the wider estate strategy, but similarly we're starting to look at that for the HRA estate as well. So that's something that's very much in development at this stage, but it will cover net zero in terms of their ambition, and trying to make sure that buildings are fit for purpose, structurally sound, roofing methods that are durable, etc. So that in the event of more frequent storms, which is likely, we are in the best possible position. But it's not an overnight fix, clearly, and it will be a substantial investment programme over a large number of years.
You want to come back again, Kirsten?
One, if that's okay. Yep. Thank you. All good stuff as well. And it's good to know it being taken account of. Is it covered in the risk management plans that picked up? Because it's trying to maintain that golden thread from strategy to right through to resource plans and risk.
yeah, it's covered. There's also a corporate risk against infrastructure and property as well. So it's covered right across the whole council estate,
Okay.
as well as our own resource plan.
Are members able to see the risk control plan for
Yeah.
the housing? Yeah, thank you. That's me. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Kirsten. Craig, you know, there's a continual programme for upgrades to properties and things like roofs, because they're most at risk in the situation that happened in January. You know, I'm asking a question, but I think I know the answer to this one. I'm pretty sure that up-to-date standards are used when these new roofs are constructed and put in place. You know, you can come back to that and agree to that. I see you nodding. And I wonder, you know, I take Kirsten's point, you know, that you know, we're seeing more severe weather than we're used to seeing, but I just wonder, how much would the impact on the programmes that we have if we did do something that was sort of, maybe not the proper term, but if it was more belt and braces to protect against storms? Like, for example, you know, if you take areas, you know, places like Switzerland or places that are up in the mountains where they're experiencing extreme weather like this, they've got a different structure. So would it be right to be spending additional resources to make sure that our stock is more robust at the behest of the upgrades that we would like to try and do to keep our stock to a good standard?
Thanks for the question, Chair. It kind of links back to my point about investment plans. So most of the storm damage effect was flat roofs, for example, and the felt blowing off. If we were doing a full investment programme on a particular block, for example, then there is the opportunity to look at something a bit different. So whether you want to put a small pitch on it and have a different structural construction type, then that would be looked at that appropriate time. But again, that's part of a wider investment programme for a far bigger scale of improvement. It's not something we particularly do at the moment. It would more or less be a like-for-like replacement, but that's something we can certainly consider.
Like-for-like replacement, but up to the modern
Of
standards
course,
of construction, yeah. And flat roofs, I mean, I see whenever roof upgrades take place, it replaces a flat roof with a pitched roof. I rarely see any flat roofs. I'm sure there are some still around, but any roof upgrades that we do, we normally make them into pitched roofs. Is that the case? And is there, maybe too difficult a question at the moment, but is there still quite a large amount of your stock that still has flat roofs?
I mean, there is, and when I say flat roofs, some are very minor pitches in terms of water runoff, but essentially it's still a felt roof with appropriate insulation. And that's where you would question, is there something different you could do there and put something a bit more structurally sound in?
But if we were doing any work there, we'd be looking, if we were doing upgrades there, it would likely be pitched roof replacements rather than the flat or the slight tilt, the slight sort of...
It would be a mix, but at this stage it's hard to prioritise that.
I just wanted to try and, you're making a good point, but we could make things completely bomb-proof. It would cost a lot of money, which means we wouldn't have the same money to invest to bring our stock up to a good standard. And I think it's just trying to get that balance. Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Kirsten, for your question. Is there any other questions or comments? No, don't see any. Item 10 on the agenda, the review of South Lanarkshire Council's Scheme of Assistance, pages 81 to 94. Back over to you again, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report on pages 81 to 94 is to seek approval from Housing and Technical Resources Committee for the revised South Lanarkshire Scheme of Assistance and for it to be implemented. So under section 3, in terms of background, under the Housing Scotland Act 2006, Council has a statutory duty to publish a section 72 statement referred to as a scheme of assistance, setting out how help will be provided to private sector owners and tenants of private landlords carrying out maintenance, repair and adaptations to their properties. So in accordance with the Housing and Technical Resources Policy Review Schedule approved by Housing and Technical Resources Committee on the 8th of November 2023, a review of the scheme assistance has been completed. So the review is involved in appraisal of the level and types of assistance provided, and colleagues from Property Services Home Improve team social work services, finance and corporate resources and environmental services have been involved in the development of the consultation document. So the scheme of assistance sets out the Council's approach to providing help to private owners and tenants, private landlords, carrying out the following categories of work. So it includes work to repair and maintain their properties, works needed to meet the tolerable standard, adaptation works required to meet the assessed needs where they have a need assessed by an occupational therapist, and owners who are taking part in common programmes of work where the council is a common owner. So the policy objectives aims to assist owners take responsibility for their homes and assets and reflect the theme of investing in housing quality as set out in the local housing strategy, which states that private homeowners and private landlords are encouraged and supported to plan for and invest in the maintenance of the property, including areas held in common ownership, to meet all required standards. So Section 5 looks at the consultation. So there was a formal consultation on a draft scheme of assistance which took place between 13th of December 24 and the 14th of March 25. And the consultative draft was published on the Council's website together with a corresponding questionnaire to enable feedback. Presentations and discussions on the consultative draft also took place with key stakeholders and interested groups, which included the Tenant Participation Coordination Group, Equality and Diversity Coordination Group, Disability Partnership Housing Subgroup, South Lanarkshire Private Landlord Forum, and Local Housing Strategy Steering Group. We had a total of 191 responses, and that came from individuals and organisations who completed the online questionnaire. Responses provided a mixture of positive feedback and suggestions for improvement as to how the document is displayed, and point 5.6 gives a summary of the changes or actions which were fairly minor in context. So the feedback theme improved clarity of the document. So the changes made were wording had been revised to make the document clearer and more concise with plain English used. And second point was raise awareness of and assist access to the scheme, and a summarised version detailing who it was for and how the services can help will be provided on the Council's website once published. So the next steps, subject to approval from committee today, the revised scheme of assistance will be published on the Council's website on the 1st of June 25. And Section 8 covers financial implications. So although there are no direct financial implications arising from the report, budgetary commitments relating to the scheme assistance are accounted for within capital and revenue monitoring arrangements, which are reported to Housing and Technical Resources Committee. And the budget for 24-25 was 1.09 million, and that's allocated to the scheme. So if I can refer committee back to Section 2, the recommendations. So the committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: that the revised South Lanarkshire Council Scheme of Assistance attached as Appendix 1 to the report be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Very much. And I'll move the recommendation.
I'll second it.
And I've got David Shearer. David?
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask what assistance is given to the elderly and disabled to apply for these grants and to go through the scheme of assistance, or do we just give them advice and leave them to it?
Craig?
So in relation to disabled adaptations, it's colleagues from Social Work Resource that have procedures in place to access requests for assistance. There is a grants team that will also receive prioritised assessments for services of users of the scheme. As it stands just now, previous priorities were classed as critical and substantive. However, the referrals that property services are now getting from our social work colleagues are critical only. And that's mainly down to some of the budget savings that were taken last year, which reduced the scheme. So it's only dealing with critical cases at the moment, and we're looking at that on a prioritised basis. And we get that direct from the social work resource in terms of what we can deliver out of that available budget. But when we get the referrals through, certainly our own team liaises quite heavily with the resident, just to make sure the works are planned, they are aware of the work to take place, when it's taking place. So yeah, it's a fairly robust process in place, but it's currently only dealing with critical cases.
And is the work checked at the end of the process?
Yeah, so we've got our own inspectors that review the work, as we do with any type of work programme, but so this is no different. So whether it's our own internal resource or whether it's a subcontractor that's used, if we don't do the work that's required, then that's all checked by South Lanarkshire Council staff.
Thank you, Chair.
Welcome. Alan Faulkner.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a point you mentioned about the social work input. My memory serves me correct. Social work had a £600,000 underspend in aids and adaptations in the last financial year. And yet they still had a lot of more delayed discharges due to no of an aids and adaptation in the house. Have you any views on that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if that's relevant to ask this officer about the social work budget. So, Craig, just I'll ask you to speak, but just be careful we don't cross into boundaries that we shouldn't be. I just need to make sure that it's not the social work committee here, okay? We're speaking about a separate matter. I know we are, but the underspend in the social work budget is irrelevant to what's happening in this committee.
The only thing that's probably worth mentioning, our finance colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong here. We have a partial available budget from social work. They are contributing to that budget, so it's around £300,000 of an underspend, which supports this project for 24-25. And we've been talking with our finance colleagues to make sure that we have that available budget to spend.
Thank you. Andrea.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Craig. I just wanted to ask a wee bit more about the funding. I'm just wondering how many private landlords apply for help to upgrade their properties. And I see that they're included in the scheme and they're perfectly entitled to, but I've got to be honest and say that it doesn't really sit very well with me that private landlords who are making money from renting their properties out can apply for council funds to improve them. I know it's for the good of their tenants, and I see there's it's a grey area. But as I say, just on a personal level, it doesn't really sit very comfortably with me that private landlords can access this funding. So do you have any idea what the sort of percentage of private land, do they apply for it? You know, I'm just wondering how many of them do apply.
Maybe a too detailed question to answer here, Craig, but give it a go.
I don't have
just
the breakdown of that.
Yeah.
I would be guessing, so we'd need to get that checked out.
Okay.
So we can get that information, and it is a good question
Sharon.
because it's... Sorry? Sharon? Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor. So whilst I don't have the numbers, the interest for us to allow private landlords to access this scheme of assistance is for where common parts are repaired. So, for example, where a council block of flats where we own 6 flats, there's 3 privately owned, whether they're resident owners or whether they privately rent out their property, it allows us to get a common repair done if they can access some sort of grant funding towards it. So, for example, the roof or the doors and windows. So it's in our interest to allow a proportion of the grant to be available for that so we can get common repairs undertaken.
Andrea, you haven't activated your mic. We could hear you, but anyone online wouldn't hear you.
Oh, well. So, yeah, thanks for that, Sharon. As I say, obviously when it's common repairs to improve the entire building, then they are homeowners like everyone else, and I can see that. It would just be to make improvements to their own sort of private property. where, as I say, I would expect them to fund that from their profits of being a landlord. But obviously, you know, if they're entitled to apply for the scheme, then, you know, fair enough. That was all I was thinking. Thanks.
Andrea? Sorry, Sharon?
In that instance where it would be the tenant, so it would be the private tenant applying, so say for example they needed an aids and adaptation to allow them to continue to remain in their private tenancy, it wouldn't actually be the landlord applying for that, it would be the same tenant.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Don't have anyone else. Item 11 on the agenda, reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or RAC for short, and it's an update and proposed works for Christie Place in Cambuslang, pages 95 to 100, and it's over to Sharon for that.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. And now that Davies said that whole, I'll just do the abbreviation, that'll make my life easier. So, morning everyone. So the purpose of the report this morning is initially to give an overview in relation to RAC across our residential properties across South Lanarkshire. And the second part of the report will focus specifically on 3 tenement buildings in Christie Place at Cambuslang. So taking you down to section 3 in terms of the background, so just to give a bit of context around what RAC is, so it's a reinforced version of autoclaved aerated concrete, which is usually strengthened by steel bars of mesh to enhance its structural strength. So it was widely used in the UK between the 50s up to the mid-90s, mostly as roof planks, floor planks and floor panels. So it's been used in a range of buildings across the estates across the UK. So concerns about RAC was raised in the mid-90s. However, in 2019, the Standing Committee on the Structural Safety warned that rank planks were past their expected service of life and that they could potentially collapse. However, following the collapse of 3 buildings with non-critical RAC, the Department of Education in England issued guidance in 2023 to close all school spaces where that was present, which that's what prompted the wider response and investigation. So in terms of the position here in South Lanarkshire, we had a 3-stage process to identifying the existence of RAC within our residential properties. That initially focused on desktop surveys that was undertaken by appropriately qualified staff. There was also site inspections based on industry guidance, and there was on-site surveys which was undertaken by an engineer with membership of the Institution of Structural Engineers. So the table there in section 4 notes out where we've identified RAC to be in situ. So in Rutherglen Cambuslang, we have 20 blocks of flats in central Cambuslang where there's 90 SLC properties affected where RAC is in situ. So that's been confirmed. Also in Cambuslang, there's Christie Place, which is 23 council tenants. It's 3 blocks of flats. Now that has been confirmed and potentially dangerous. There is 3 localities in East Kilbride, so it's Trinidad Way, Leeward Circle and Jamaica Drive, where it's been confirmed that RAC is in place. And lastly, in Clydesdale at Forest Place in Crisford, it was confirmed that RAC was in place. So I just want to note there that that information has been shared with the Scottish Housing Regulator. They're well aware of the surveys that have taken place. So at section 4.4, to ensure the safety of our properties where RAC has been identified, there has been some remedial works taking place or some emergency reactive works. So in terms of the masonettes in central Cambuslang, whilst that has been confirmed as having RAC in situ, there are no current plans for removal or reinstatement. There will be surveys ongoing to monitoring that as it's in reasonable condition and there is no concerns. There was only one area where there was identified risk, which was in a stairwell, which is an external stairwell, where a crash deck was installed into the roof of the external stairwell. That crash deck remains at this time, whilst we consider how to take that forward. The blocks in Christie Place in Cambuslang, which I've noted as the potentially dangerous RAC, in response, and we'll talk about that a bit further, but in response to that, we have put in emergency crash decks into the attic space and lowered the ceilings so that we could deal with the immediate risk. There are bungalows at Christie Place, so there's 3 bungalows there, but although RAC was confirmed there was no issues, it still remains in reasonable condition and no concerns. Similarly for Trinidad Way, Jamaica Drive and Leeward Circle and East Kilbride, at that point of this survey there was no emergency works required in either of these blocks. We do have the 4 bed sits at Leeward Circle sitting empty at this time, however, because there is water ingress that's came from that attic space, and that applies additional risk to the RAC. And moving on to Chris Ford, the bungalows are fine and will continue to be monitored every 3 years or at change of tenancy when it becomes void. But the terraced houses at Forest Place, since writing this report, the 3 council-owned terraced houses have now had new roofs installed. So that's been completed. So having considered the condition of the properties and the associated risk, the priority has now been given to the tenement blocks at Christie Place and Cambuslang. The condition and the deterioration of the RAC has been assessed as potentially dangerous, with a intrusive survey indicating immediate risk. So the options appraisal has been completed, and as we move on to section 5, this will give a lot more detail in terms of next steps. So just for information, for those that don't know, Christie Place is located in central Cambuslang. It's right next to the main street. You'll see it as you come from halfway, or as you come up from the motorway. It's the 3 blocks that will present straight away at the town centre. So Christie Place has 3 tenement buildings with 8 properties per block and 3 individual bungalows. Of the 24 tenemental properties, 20 are owned by the council and 4 are owner-occupied. So following inspection by the engineer, it was confirmed last April that the RAC in the tenement buildings was potentially dangerous. So therefore, due to this, emergency works were required to deal with that immediate risk. So we decanted the tenants, and thankfully it was all council tenants that were in the upper floor of these 3 blocks. They were decanted for 3 weeks whilst we installed the crash deck into the attic space and lowered their ceilings. So section 6 discusses the proposed solution and financial considerations for Christie Place. So following the detailed options appraisal and reviewing of the financial considerations, it's now proposed that a programme of work is undertaken to remove the existing RAC from those 3 tenement buildings, whilst also delivering a series of housing investment works to complete any necessary repairs and also include energy efficiency improvements. In addition to the removal of RAC, the associated replacement of the roof, a range of other works will be progressed, which includes the installation of UPVC windows, PV panels and cavity wall insulation. 6.3 details the costs. So the feasibility cost to remove the RAC and undertake proposed housing investment works are £2.3 million. This includes indicative cost to the owners of just under £400,000 following the recent feasibility. There is a range of grant funding available for the 4 owner-occupiers that can contribute to the cost of the new roofs, the doors and the windows and the insulation. There is no grant funding towards the removal of the RAC. Individual discussions have recently taken place. However, we would propose to move into full engagement with the 4 owners. By undertaking the full retrofitting works to deal with RAC and meet energy efficiency standards, the condition of these blocks will significantly increase. It will enhance the entrance to Cambuslang Town Centre. Given the location of those, it will deliver these improvement works and contribute to the Council's priorities for town centre regeneration. So section 7, next steps. Subject to approval by committee this morning, it is proposed that the works will commence during 2025 to remove the RAC and progress the other investment works. A proportion of the required budget has been accounted for within this year's housing investment programme, and is anticipated that the works will roll into 2026-2027. So building on the work already undertaken to inform the residents about the existing of RAC, both council tenants and owners, a second stage of engagement plan will be developed, which will include the initiation of dialogue with owners about the costs and the available grant fundings. It should be emphasised, however, that legally the council is not liable for the RAC removal costs, and the liability sits with the owner. The council here in these blocks is a majority owner, and therefore can instruct the proposed works to go ahead. There has been several engagement between myself and legal services around advice and engagement process with owner-occupiers. So section 9, in terms of the financial implications, as I've already mentioned, the financial implications of this to the capital programme is £2.3 million, includes associated costs to the 4 owners, which is just under £400,000. The Housing Investment Capital Programme includes £1.25 million, leaving the requirement of £733,000 for next year's. These works will be required to be considered in the 2026-27 capital programme so that we can conclude these. For the 4 owner occupiers, as detailed at 9.3 of the report, the full cost for the whole remedials is just over £99,000 per owner occupier. However, owners may be eligible for grant assistance, which will reduce these total costs. Now, this includes 35% grant funding for the new roof, £9,500 grant funding via the ESABS funding for the external wall insulation, and a further £3,500 for windows and doors. Additionally, if the owner is deemed to be in extreme fuel poverty, depending on qualifying criteria, there could be a final grant sum of £5,000 available. This financial assistance and other potential options to support the owner-occupiers will be discussed in detail on a one-to-one basis. We wholly recognise this will be dependent on individual circumstances. So therefore, I'd like to take committee back to section 2, to the recommendations. So the first recommendation is that the current position in relation to RAC across the residential estate in South Lanarkshire Council is noted, and that the proposed solution for removing the RAC and dealing with the remedies in Christie Place is approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And I'll move the recommendations.
I'll second them.
And I do have Andrea Cowan first, please. Andrea.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks for the report, Sharon. This is there's been such a lot of publicity about RAC recently, and I'm sure this is a scary predicament for the tenants and homeowners. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Do you have any idea how many homeowners this will involve throughout the various projects? I know we've got 4 at Christie Place, which, you know, is a small number, but I suppose that gives you a chance to sort of work out the best route forward. I just wondered how many it would involve in total. I think quite a lot of these masonettes in Central Cambuslang will be privately owned, and again, possibly some private landlords. It's that type of area. I also wondered if you had any idea. I know you've given a breakdown, percentages for the roof and percentages for this and that. Do you have any idea how much actual sort of cash money it will cost each of these 4 homeowners at the end of the day, providing they qualify for the grants? And I'd also like to ask if there's any Scottish Government or UK Government funding to support the Council in this work. As I say, I know this is a national issue, and I just wondered if there was any funding coming from any sources. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes. I think that's me. Yep, I think that's me. Thanks.
Sharon.
Thanks, Councillor Cowan. So in terms of the homeowners, it varies across it's the masonettes in Central Cambuslang is where we've got the bulk of the homeowners. Yeah. That's the area where it's mostly affected, as you say, and actually some of those blocks from the review, there is more homeowners in the blocks than what we actually retain. So for example, during the storm damage that we had earlier this year, there is a street in Central Cambuslang where the roof was affected. It was in Mansion Court, and we only have 2 council-owned properties in there. Yeah. So the dialogue is differently there because we're not a majority owner. But it definitely, there is owners across each of that. So there's 20 blocks in Central Cambuslang, and they are completely mixed tenure. So we will be increasing the numbers of owners. And the same goes for the Trinidad Way and Leeward Circle within East Kilbride, where there's owner-occupiers within those blocks. The difference for those areas, though, in the Masonettes and Cambuslang and those 2 blocks in East Kilbride, is that there will be planned housing investment work. There'll be a kind of period of negotiations. It will come over time because the condition of that RAC is appropriate just now. Yeah. So it won't be as reactive as this has kind of been sprung upon the owners at Christie Place, to be honest. It's kind of happened really quickly. But I can get you the exact numbers of the owners. Yeah. In relation to your other points, actual kind of cash figures, so the removal of the RAC and roof reinstatement is roughly, give or take, based on the feasibility, £30,000 per owner, but they will receive 35% grant towards the roof. So again, give or take, you're just under the £20,000 as the cash costs. The other costs then go into the external wall insulation and the windows and doors. there's grant funding for each of those elements. And again, some of that might be that the owner decides they don't want their windows and doors done and they don't need to participate in that part of the work.
Yeah.
We are taking a fabric first approach because there is no point well, in terms of energy efficiency standards, there's no point in us coming in, replacing the roof and not doing the external wall insulation in these blocks in Christie Place. And if you'll know them, they're particularly old stock that do need a level of investment works. So that's why we're packaging it up. But there will be elements where they'll get grant funding and elements where they might decide to opt out. There'll be other individual options that we'll discuss with owners because we recognise £20,000 is significant and some of these owners might not have that in cash. And this could potentially affect the value of their property. So there'll be individual discussions with each of those owners around the options available to them. And then finally, on your last question, unfortunately, no, there has been no UK or Scottish Government funding for RAC, and that's something that local authorities have been speaking to the Scottish Government around, but no, nothing at this time.
Nothing so far. Thanks. And I know that I spoke to you before about this, and there may be an option to buy back some of these flats as well. And obviously, I'm sure that these costs would need to be taken into account, but possibly that's an answer for some of these homeowners who must have got the shock of their life when they get these bills through the door, you know, initially. So anyway, thanks very much, and I'll look forward to seeing how this progresses. You have a big job. Thank you.
Sharon, just that term buyback, I'm sure most of us in this room will have had heard of people who are interested in selling their property back to the council but want to remain in it. Now, we know that that's not the case because if we purchase a property, it goes into stock and it's allocated accordingly. But is it okay to mention this, Sharon? But you know, there's a potential here for being able to make an arrangement where, just in order to get the works done, that we could sort of, it's not necessarily a buyback, it's an arrangement of a different name. I think we need to call it a different name just to cause any confusion, because people do request to sell a property and still live in the property. Can you touch on that, Sharon?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Andrea. So absolutely, in terms of our buyback, the link to the National Acquisition Programme, we do not buy back properties with sitting tenants or sitting occupants. However, in this instance, it will link back to the regeneration works that we did at Whitleyburn and Cambuslang, where there was options for owners to become, there were resident owners to become a council tenant when we'll buy back their property. So there's a potential for this option. However, we need to explore whether these owners are occupying their property or whether they're renting them out to other people, and that'll be part of the individual discussions that we'll have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sharon. David Shearer.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the Cresford issue, which is obviously in my ward, are there any owners affected there, and have we had discussions? I noticed from the report that we've already done some work there, which is great, very proactive in getting that sorted. But have we had discussions with any of the owner occupiers in Cresford?
Sharon.
Thanks, Councillor Shearer. We did. We reached out to each of the owners in the terraced houses to advise that our properties had been surveyed and identified as having RAC that was not of its best condition, and we were going to deal with it. The offer, we engaged with them, we written to them, we let them know we were coming out to do a roofing programme, but we had no further engagement and nobody wanted to participate and come forward in the replacement roof programme. So we dealt with it was much easier in that sense in Cresford because we were able to go into the individual terraced houses and deal with our own issue. We didn't have any multi-tenure to deal with, but we have updated donors and they're aware.
Welcome. Norman Ray.
Thank you, Chair. I think on one hand, this is obviously good news that this work's being done, and also the other improvements that are going to take place alongside that. But I did have a couple of questions. Partly, the first one's already been covered, which is around affordability for the owner-occupiers. And I suppose my sort of general question, wider question around that was just about what happens ultimately if somebody can't afford it. But I think to some extent you've covered that a bit with some of the other options that might be available in terms of maybe the council purchasing the flat. The other question that I had was around the practicalities. I presume at least some of the residents, those in the upper floors, will have to leave the property while the work's being done. I just wondered what the sort of arrangements for that would be, what the sort of time scale that they would have to leave the properties would be. Thanks.
Sharon?
Thanks, Councillor Ray. It's absolutely in your first point around affordability. There'll be a range of options to be discussed. And what we've previously done for investment programmes, there's a payment plan option, but given the value of these works, there'll be an opportunity for an extended payment plan. So there'll be a whole host of options available that we'll have that individual dialogue with the owners around. In terms of the practicalities, yes, we will need to decant the upper floors, so the tenants that sit on the top floor of each of them, similarly to what we've done when we had to decant them to put in the emergency crash deck. So at this point in time, I don't have any time scales of how long any individual tenant would be out their home. As I say, thankfully they are our tenants and they've been really accommodating throughout this whole time, and are currently living with a lowered ceiling in their flats. So they're really keen to get the work done and have been in regular contact with the local housing team. But yeah, I can, once the programme's finalised, I'll definitely share that. So that's, I'll let you know the timescales associated with that.
Right, thanks. Will it be a sort of relatively local alternative that they would move to? Is that?
Yeah, the last time when we decanted, we managed to find other local flats. So, for example, we had a void in Kyle Court and we were able to move people there. Some actually chose to just go and stay with family or friends because it was quite short term. And we had another incident where we made an offer of a bed and breakfast, again, because it was short term. So, depending on the timescales, we'll look at each of those options again.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. We're getting past 11 now and I'm due an eye break, but I'll take Kirsten last and we'll stop for a 5-minute recess following that.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks for all your work in this area as well. Thinking about the repayment periods, what's the normal repayment period for substantial works, and is there any opportunities for longer repayment periods? Just thinking ahead to some of these properties across the stock are getting to a certain age and they'll need larger scale works for retrofit programmes, and I was just wondering if there's any plans or opportunities to extend repayment periods. Thank you.
Sharon?
Thanks, Councillor Robb. Yes, absolutely. That's what I just mentioned. There is the opportunity for extended periods because we recognise the value of this as significant. So in terms of the routine housing investment plan works, they're kind of standard timescales that you could have like a couple of years, 12 to 18 months or short term, but that we recognise this will be significant. I say we've also dialogue with our legal services around other options that could be explored. We don't necessarily want to go into this morning in committee because we want to have those individual discussions with owners, and that might be around whether we put security on properties, anything at all like that. But I think it needs to be tailored in that individual's financial position, whether they've still got their mortgage in their home, whether they outright own their home, and all the different aspects that will be person-centred.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to take a 5-minute break just now for the BSL users, and I'll see you all back here at 11:10. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's now gone time, and it's now past that time. I was just politely reminded. So, just for avoidance of any doubt, I'm pretty sure I did move the recommendations on the last item, and we got agreement on that. Can we just confirm that everyone's agreed to the recommendations? Agreed. Is that okay for you? Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item 12, and it's High Blantyre Hall Community Asset Transfer to 3rd Blantyre Community Group, and it's pages 101 to 106. Jerry McFarlane, please.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report is to advise the committee of the request for the disposal of High Blantyre Hall to 3rd Blantyre Community Group and seek approval to the principal terms and conditions set out in section 5. High Blantyre Hall in Cemetery Road, Blantyre is owned by the council and was previously managed by South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. And following a review of its business plan, the board announced in March 24 it couldn't sustain service delivery from this facility and control was returned to the council. In recognition of the potential impact upon communities, the council invited local organisations to express interest in these properties through community asset transfer, with support from the Community Fight Back Fund and the Renewable Energy Fund to keep facilities open while this process took place. A request for a one-year concession lease was approved by the Housing and Tech Resources Committee on the 18th of September 24, with the 3rd Blantyre Community Group taking occupancy of the facility on the 14th of October. The group subsequently submitted a request for community asset transfer of the hall by sale, with the validation date of the 11th of October, and public consultation was undertaken and no comments or objections were received. The organisation is a Scottish Charitable Incorporated organisation registered with the Office of Scottish Charity at OSCAR on the 5th of August 24. And the organisation was established by the office bearers of the 3rd Blantyre Scout Group to provide eligibility to obtain a concession lease and in turn apply for a longer term lease via the CAT process, which turned into a sale, and to continue operating the hall. The proposal is for the community group to continue to occupy, use and maintain the building in the long term. The extent of the property, which is shown in the attached plan, comprises a single-storey building with a tarmac car park and children's soft outdoor play area enclosed by fencing. There's areas of grassed open space around the building, and the boundary is screened from the adjacent cemetery by a mixture of fencing and stone walls. The property is currently used by the applicant for the purposes of operating a scout troop and hire to local community groups for their own activities, and as there's no change of proposed use or development planned, the planning consent won't be required for continued use. The property is suitable for the proposed use, and the organisation has the capacity and funds to manage the facility. This sale will enable the organisation to continue to operate the facility and continue to remove liability for the council and property costs and grounds maintenance. In addition, it will remove the cost of operating the asset from the Community Fight Back Fund and also generate a capital receipt of £24,000 for the council's general services account. The council has no alternative operational requirements for the subjects, and the planning, zoning, site configuration and the existing building would safeguard the value in terms of any alternative development proposal. Within their request, the group requested a 100% discount on the jointly agreed independent valuation. But as the price is to be paid reflects community benefit, which has been assessed as very good, and the requirement to seek best value in the disposal of a council asset, a discount of 80% of the unrestricted market value is recommended. This is a consistent approach adopted in previous sales transactions for properties of a similar nature and reflects the best value assessment. An independent valuation was prepared by the District Valuer's Office, which reported a market value on an unrestricted basis at £120,000 and a market value restricted for use as community centre at £80,000. The unrestricted market value is considered to be the appropriate base for the valuation in respect of a sale. It's proposed to sell High Blantyre, 11 Cemetery Road, Blantyre, to the 3rd Blantyre Community Group for £24,000, reflecting this 80% discount to the market value. And I would refer members to the recommendations in paragraph 2 of the report and ask that the subjects at High Blantyre Hall be disposed to 3rd Blantyre Community Group, subject to terms and conditions outlined in section 5 of the report, and that the Executive Director of Housing and Technical Resources, in conjunction with the Head of Administration and Legal Services, be authorised to conclude all matters in respect of the sale. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll move the two recommendations. And I believe my vice
I'll second it.
convener will second that. Thank you very much. I've got Andrea Cowan.
Oh, that's me. Hi, thank you. Thank you, Jerry. It's good to see, I know we don't call them cat lights now, but it's good to see a cat light progressing to be a full cat, so that's good news. And I've actually been asked just by one of my Blantyre colleagues to ask a question. I don't have any first-hand knowledge of this building. I'm told it's in very poor condition, that it requires a new floor and that the electrics require to be redone. And so I just wondered, I'm presuming that that would have been factored into the valuation. Sometimes the district valuer does a sort of desktop valuation, so just wondered if they actually visited the premises. And also, I'm told that the group are fundraising at the moment to have these works carried out. I just wondered if there was any help available through the council. I know that we're selling it to them. I just wondered if there was any, because it's a community group, any ongoing support, even if not financial support, even if just some general support about how to go about this process. Thanks.
Okay, Jerry. Yep.
Yes, as you rightly pointed, it's an independent valuation, and I can confirm that the district valuer went out and saw the property and was shown round it, and has reflected the condition of the property in the figures. In terms of support, where the Community Asset Transfer Officer and the Community Engagement Team will liaise with them, there isn't any identified financial support, but there are mechanisms in which it can leverage funding and help assist them in that way.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much.
Andrea, I allowed that question, but I, at one point, asked a question on behalf of a colleague, and Ian Strachan was quick to remind me that I shouldn't have done that. So, but I've allowed it this time, but it's really not the correct protocol. Sorry. Good point. Good point. Alan Faulkner.
Thanks, Chair. It's page 102, 4.3, the last sentence. The property, it's not considered the property as any realistic alternative development. I've got to say, I was up that area the other day. I mean, it's in a residential area, the property, and the council, half a mile down the road, are building houses in the old Curtin site, and there's a developer 100 yards up the road knocked down 2 cottages to build. Have we any safeguards, once we've sold them, that they don't knock it down or sell it to a developer to build houses? Or we've any comeback for that? Thank you.
Thank you. No, there are no safeguards written into the contract in terms of any clawback. The value is assessed on an unrestricted value basis, and the reduction is to reflect community asset, the community benefit. What I would say in terms of development value is, given the scale of it, the district value also intimated an end value of £45,000 for the site subsequent to demolition. So it's, given the size and scale in the existing building and the planning limitations, there's very little scope for any meaningful development on it.
And it's a good question, Alan, and it's a question that I've asked for various different asset transfers, and where it's appropriate, safeguards have been built into that. Stephen, could you touch on, I'm sure you had come up with a form of words that would slip into a committee report to protect us against that, if you could just remind us.
Yeah, there was a form of words we've used previously, an anti-embarrassment clause.
Anti-embarrassment clause.
Almost in the event that where we sell an asset, to make sure that we can get a clawback over a period of time in the event that somebody tries to flip it. So it's something that we've done previously.
And it was deemed not appropriate in this one, Jerry. Okay, Alan? Thank you very much. No other questions? We're all agreed on that. Item 13, Telework Pitches and Pavilion Stonehouse, Community Asset Transfer to Albert Football Club Limited, pages 107 to 112. And again, that's Jerry McParland. Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise the committee of the request for a lease of the Telework Pitches and Pavilion in Stonehouse to Albert FC Limited, and seek approval to the principal terms and conditions set out in Section 5. The pitches and pavilion were previously managed by the council and, similar to the last one, were handed back following a review of the SLC board. The football club are a community team who play amateur football in the West of Scotland Football League and had used this facility as their home ground for a very number of years, and they came forward and indicated they wished to be considered for a concession lease and future community asset transfer of the facility. An application for a one-year concession lease was therefore approved under delegated authority, with the club taking occupation of the facility on the 1st of September last year. The club have subsequently submitted a request for a community asset transfer of the facility, initially on the basis of a disposal, but subsequently altered to a long lease. This was validated on the 6th of December, and public consultation was carried out between the 6th of December and 9th of January, with no comments or objections. The club have been in existence in one form or another since 1878 and have used the Tailworks facility since 2014. As part of the process for a CAT application, the organisation reconstituted as a company limited by guarantee, which is suitable for both a concession lease and a full asset transfer. And the organisation registered with Companies House on the 15th of February 2024. Having successfully operated the facility on an interim basis during the concession lease, the proposal is for the club to continue to occupy, use and maintain the facility in the longer term. The site itself consists of a metal frame changing pavilion, car parking, 2 11-a-side grass pitches, 1 9-a-side pitch and 2 synthetic 5-a-side pitches. The 5-a-side pitches themselves were installed in 2013 and generally considered to have a 10-year lifespan. However, due to inactivity during the COVID period, it's estimated to have a further 3 years' life left before the replacement should be considered. The property is currently used by the applicant for community youth football teams and the home ground for the adult amateur team. And as there is no proposed change of use, planning consent will not be required. The property is suitable for the proposed use, and given the track record of the original club and current running experience of the facility during the initial lease, the organisation is considered to have the capacity and funds to manage the facility. The lease will enable the club to continue to operate the facility and remove liability from the council in terms of grounds maintenance. In addition, the lease will allow the club to pursue external funding for development of the facility, and the council has no alternative operational requirements. The risk of the transfer are considered low, as the property is a purpose-built facility surrounded by land owned by the council and designated as priority green space and urban green network. Therefore, it is not considered that the property has any realistic alternative development potential. It is therefore recommended that Tailworks pitches and pavilion at Union Street Stonehouse be leased to Albert FC for a rent of £1 for 25 years, subject to agreed break options, and I refer members to the recommendations in paragraph 2 of the report and ask that the subjects at Tailworks pitches and pavilion be leased to Albert FC, subject to the terms and conditions outlined in section 5 of the report, and that the Executive Director, in conjunction with the Head of Administration and Legal Services, be authorised to conclude all matters in respect of the lease. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll move the recommendation.
I'll second it.
Thank you. And I do have Ross Gowland. Ross?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd like to say how much I support the asset transfer. I met Royal Albert FC with local members and local MP Joni Reid, and I know how passionate Ross Thompson and his colleagues are about the park and youth football in the Stonehouse area. The goal is to ensure the site remains open for the local community and beyond. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Ross. Well done. Thank you. Don't see anyone else. Moving on to item 14, Dolphinton Hall, Edinburgh Road, Dolphinton, and it's a concession release to Dolphinton Community Association, pages 113 to 118. Again, Jerry McParlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise the committee of the request for a concession lease of Dolphinton Hall to Dolphinton Hall Community Association and seek approval to the principal terms and conditions set out in section 5. The subject of Dolphinton Hall were previously managed by South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture and subsequent to the review handed back to the council. With no viable interest in the property, it was closed to the public whilst the decision was made on its future. Subsequently, a local community organisation approached the council with a request for a concession lease of the subject to enable them to reopen the facility to the local community. And the lease will enable them to operate the facility while testing the viability of a future community asset transfer. At this point, this is not a formal CAT request in terms of the Community Empowerment Act. However, the application to lease has been assessed following the established procedure. Dolphinton Community Hall Association is a newly established organisation formed by the local community members, specifically with a view to reopening the hall and safeguarding the future for the village. The organisation was awarded SKIO status by Oscar on the 14th of April 2025, with the aims to provide Dolphinton and the surrounding district with a recreational facility and to organise recreational activities, to advance education, health and welfare, and in particular promote opportunities for learning and promote improved physical and mental health, and to advance citizenship and/or community development and the promotion of voluntary sector and/or effectiveness of the efficiency of charities. The proposal is the applicant will operate the facility as a community hall and through its management develop additional activities which will evidence a sustainable operating model and support a future CAT application. And the grant of a concession lease will allow the organisation to assess this viability. The property is a single-storey building with a main hall, 2 small meeting rooms, a kitchen and toilets, and car parking is provided via public car parking situated adjacent. Planning services have indicated that planning consent will not be required as there is no change of use. The property is suitable for the proposed use and the organisation will be eligible for funding support from the Renewable Energy Fund, which will allow both support for revenue and capital funding to continue to operate the building, greatly reducing the risk of failure in the short term. The grant of the lease will allow the facility to remain open and relieve the council of the costs of empty property rates, utility charges, insurance costs and any repairs. And the risks associated with the proposed lease are considered low, given the status of the organisation, the funding streams available and the fact that the request is for a short-term lease. It is therefore proposed to lease Dolphinton Hall to the Dolphinton Hall Community Association for a rent of £1 for 1 year, and I refer members to the recommendations in paragraph 2 of the report and ask that the former Dolphinton Hall be leased to the Dolphinton Hall Community Association subject to the terms and conditions outlined in section 5, and that the Executive Director, along with the Head of Administration and Legal Services, be authorised to conclude all matters in respect of the lease. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I'll move the recommendations.
I'll second it.
And do we have any questions or comments? I don't see anyone. Item 15 and 16 on the agenda are items for noting, and I would propose, given that members have had papers in hand, I would propose that we move these, I move these 2 items on block unless anyone has got any questions or comments relating to these matters. Are we all agreed? Okay. Now, before I bring the... Sorry, Kirsten, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, a quick question, please. Thanks for allowing all my questions. It was just on some of the energy stuff as well. Am I right on page 129? That energy
which item are you talking about there, Kirsten?
Oh, sorry, yep. Item 15.
And, okay.
Am I right in seeing that electricity costs have increased by 75%? On page 129.
Jerry.
Yes, I would have to check specifically on that point, but I believe they have risen by that level, unfortunately.
Okay, so just grateful for member support for previous amendments to budgets to increase the CEIF fund, which is helping to put solar panels on schools to try and save some of those energy costs as well. So hopefully that can continue into the future. On the flip side of that, on page 134, item A9, the energy demand reduction plan, it was just to ask when and where a next update on that would be to try and reduce energy demand and save further on bills. Thank you.
Jerry.
Sorry, unfortunately I'm not aware. I'm not sure when the reduction plan will be reported, but I'll find out the detail and come back directly on it.
Okay, so thank you. Before I bring the meeting to a close, members may already be aware, but Lorraine Meek from the Anti-Social Investigation Manager has arranged for a CCTV van to be present down at the side of the building here on the West Wing entrance. If anybody would like to come along, I would encourage members to go and see this. It's very high tech, and it lets members see what equipment and how this is used to best tackle antisocial behaviour within our communities. So that is to be there for 11:40-ish, but I believe it's there already. Sharon tell me it's there already. So all it is for me now is to bring the meeting to a close, and thank you all very much for your attendance. And I've got no urgent business. Thank you.